In this episode, we take a look at the ZOOM PodTrak P4, a recorder for podcasters. This entire episode is recorded with the ZOOM PodTrak P4 and a Shure SM7B dynamic microphone. The reason I'm using this microphone, it's very popular amongst podcasters, so that's what you're hearing. First of all, let's go ahead and give you a podcast sample. Okay, tell me about star watching.
We went and stood on the platform otherwise known as my sandbox to try and observe Neowise a few weeks ago.
What's Neowise?
Comet Neowise. I can't forget the technical term for the closest point to Earth was a couple of weeks ago, but it's still visible, I think, and we came close. We got really good at finding the Big Dipper.
Yes.
And Arcturus, so we got close. But it was either, I think a couple nights it was cloudy. One night we couldn't stay up late enough to actually see it. But it was cool. And then this week is the Perseids.
We will have another attempt at some meteors.
Yes.
Yeah.
Next up, here is a remote call sample. All right. So we have on the line here, Emma. Tell us what's the latest with Ableton.
I got it to make noise yesterday.
You got it to make noise. Okay, that's a step forward, I'm gathering.
It is. What I had done was loaded a MIDI patch, like a pre-done chord progression. Wow. And I didn't load an instrument to play it.
Oh, whoops.
Yeah. So once I figured that out, a lot of stuff made sense.
Okay, good. So have you written your first song in Ableton yet?
I'm working on it.
Okay, cool. What happens when you're done composing it? Then what's the next step? And is everything okay? It sounds like something just knocked over.
Once I've written out all the MIDI patches, I usually try to do a mix. My mixing is still mediocre, but, that's part of the curve.
Next up, let's run through all of the pros for the PodTrak P4. First of all, it has 4 XLR inputs for professional-grade microphones. Each of those inputs can provide up to 70 dB of gain, which is pretty impressive for a $200 device. Haven't seen that before. Also, on each channel, you can independently turn on or off the 48 volts phantom power. So if you are going to use condenser microphones, you're all set there too. This recorder records both a mix of everyone's microphone plus independent channels for each input or each microphone. And in addition to that, it also records the sound pads, which are the 4 buttons you can use to play back sounds that you have preloaded onto the P4. All of those are recorded to separate tracks, so you can do a super careful mix in post if you choose to do that, or there's also recorded a stereo mix to a separate file, and you can just use that if you need to turn around and deliver very quickly. There are 4 independent headphone jacks, and they each have their own volume control. You can power with 2 AA batteries, and also there are 2 USB-C inputs. One of them is dedicated to power. The other one you can connect to your computer and record to your computer or your mobile device. When you're connected to your computer via that input, you can bus power the P4 as well. So a lot of different power options, which is good. Now, when the P4 is connected to your computer via USB, it becomes a 2-input, 2-output audio interface. That is to say, you can connect microphones to the P4, and then that will go via USB to your computer, your mobile, or your tablet, and you can record it there. Now, in that case, you're recording just the mix, not the isolated channels as well. But the good news is you can also record to the SD card in the P4 at the same time that you're connected to your computer via USB, and you can record on your computer as well. Now, if you are connected to your computer via USB-C, and you want to do some sort of remote call, bring in a remote guest or host via Skype, for example, there is also a mix minus feature. Now, if you're not familiar with that, what that does is it makes it so that when the person on the other end of the remote call is talking, the P4 is not sending their voice back to them, which would result in this sort of echoey kind of disorienting sound. So it just turns that off so they're not hearing it, but you're still recording them and yourself locally on the P4. There's also a 3.5mm jack that you can connect your smartphone to the P4 with. You can then use that to record anything coming off of the P4, including phone calls, Skype calls, any other sort of voice over IP. And there is also an optional Bluetooth adapter that allows you to connect your phone via Bluetooth instead. One of the things I really like about the PodTrak P4 is that It's very easy to control. It has dedicated dials for the input levels or gain, and it also has dedicated controls for the headphone volume. You really don't have to go into the menu all that often. So maybe when you need to do something like format an SD card, maybe turn on the limiters or anything like that you would do before the recording starts. But then as soon as the recording starts, all the controls you need are right there on the front. Speaking of menu settings, there are two things, limiters and low-cut filters. So these help you solve some practical problems. First of all, a limiter will actually turn down the volume if someone gets too loud and prevent that audio from clipping. Very helpful feature. It's just a matter of turning it on in the menus before you start recording. Here's an example. We're going to do a little test here, testing the limiters on the Zoom F4. I'm using the Schoeps CMC 641, and right now we have the gain set to about 5.5 out of 10. And we've hit the limiter a couple times, but let's push it really hard and see how it sounds. We now have the gain set to 7 out of 10, and it seems to be pushing really hard up against the limits here at 0 dB. And it actually is sounding, I'm not getting a ton of distortion. Of course, there's a little bit of a pumping sound, but that's a lot better than distortion, so it's definitely doing something interesting here. Not entirely sure how the limiters on this work, but overall, I'd say much better than I expected. A low-cut filter, likewise, is useful to cut out low-frequency rumble and things like maybe air conditioners. It'll help remove some of that noise. One of the things that kind of surprised me about this as a $200 device is that it does really well in terms of self-noise. The spec from Zoom says that the EIN, which is the spec for self-noise, is minus 124 dBu, measured with the IHFA method. In our test, we found that when we did some very practical tests and measured the noise after recording myself talking for a little bit, loudness normalized to minus 23 LUFS, and then measured the silent portion where I didn't talk, and that's measuring not just self-noise, but other things as well. And that came in at minus 73 dB RMS on average. And then as far as the max came in at minus 71.78 dB RMS. So that's actually extraordinarily good, especially for a device in the $200 range. And as I mentioned before, the PodTrak P4 comes in at $199 US, which is a pretty impressive price for something with 4 microphone inputs with very clean performance. Now, no product is perfect. Let's run through the cons really quickly. First of all, in terms of build quality, it is plastic. It's not super robust, so you're going to have to be careful with it to get a good long life out of it. I think you can get a good long life out of it if you take care of it. I would probably, if you are going to be taking it mobile, which it's really kind of built for, then I would plan on getting some sort of case for it. It doesn't come with one, so that's up to you to provide on your own. But if you are going to do a lot of traveling, I wouldn't just throw it in another bag with a bunch of other gear. I would be more concerned about it holding up over time. And if it fell, it would probably withstand 1 or 2 drops, but if you drop it on concrete, I think there's a good chance you might chip something there. One thing that is just kind of a weird thing, it records at 44.1 kilohertz, 16-bit. And I don't really even have issues with the 16-bit or 44.1 kilohertz necessarily. It sounds great. The problem is that all of the video standards are 48 kilohertz, really? I mean, you can upload to YouTube, for example, now, and mobile phones now are starting to record audio at 44.1 kilohertz as well in an effort to save space and storage. But all of the video standards technically are 48 kilohertz, so it just seems like a kind of a weird decision, and I would rather like to see a 48 kilohertz option as well. There is a little bit of hiss in the headphone outputs. I'm even hearing it right now as we talk. So it's not generally a huge problem, but it's always kind of there and persistent. And that just kind of speaks to the quality of the headphone amplifiers. They are clearly kind of budget headphone amplifiers. Now, this one I'm going to present as more of a note and something you need to keep in mind. I love that there are 2 USB-C inputs, so you can power the unit for a long time using a USB battery bank or even a USB-C to AC adapter. And so pretty much a lot of mobile phones have those available, or you can just buy one third party. But the great thing about that is that you can power this for pretty much as long as you need to. I should note, however, in our test with AA batteries, the powering time is not amazing. So what I did is I actually powered 3 condenser microphones, each with the phantom power turned on, and 3 sets of headphones with a 45 ohm, 63 ohm, and 80 ohm impedance rating. And we were able to power that for an hour and 25 minutes. So If you're planning to power this with just AA batteries, I think you need to keep in mind, and in that particular case, I should mention, those were nickel metal hydride rechargeable batteries, IKEA rechargeable batteries. Just keep in mind that if you are planning to power that way, you probably can realistically expect about an hour. I would be careful going anything beyond that without a USB battery bank or some other sort of power source via USB-C. All right, so who is this device for? I would say, first of all, it's really not for audio nerds. If you're an audio nerd filmmaker, I think you really should probably look at the Zoom F series of recorders, the F4, F6, F8, F8N. If you are a musician, I would probably look more at the LiveTrak series of recorders, or perhaps the Zoom Handy recorders, H4N, H5, H6. This one is really made to be super simple for non-audio nerds who just want quality audio for their podcast, and that's it. So it's a really focused device. It's made for that very purpose. So I wouldn't really use it for other things like that. You could use it for a kind of an audio live streaming show, but I wouldn't buy it and plan to feed the outputs of the headphones into cameras or anything like that. It's really not made for that. There's no other sort of output either, unless you go to USB-C to your computer, mobile device, tablet. So there is a look at the PodTrak P4 from Zoom. Hope that was helpful for you. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave those down below. And if you've not already subscribed, make sure you do that. And we'll be sure to get you more great videos on how to improve your lighting and sound for video. Talk to you soon.